Hey everybody, welcome back to Keeping It Real with Tiff and Carl. I'm Carl Rabin.
I'm Tiff Salcido.
And joining us today, we have a very special guest, a good friend of the podcast, Miss Avni Panchal. Avni is a licensed clinical social worker, burnout expert, and professional speaker who spent over 15 years inside child welfare and mental health systems. She's a lecturer at San Francisco State University's Social Work Graduate Program, the creator of the Beyond Burnout Framework, and trains approximately one-third of California social workers through professional development programs. Through her brand, The Indian Counselor, she works with organizations and leaders ready to move beyond surface level wellness fixes. She doesn't talk about resilience, she talks about redesign. And we are very lucky to have you today, Avni. So thanks for joining us.
Thank, thank you for having me. I'm very excited for this conversation.
Yeah. So just I mean, we introduced you, but just, you're I know you're working on, as an expert on the idea of burnout and
Yeah.
rather than resilience redesign. So you know, um, what brought you to that concentration?
Um, I would say what brought me to it was personal. I started working at 23, not counting internship. And I was doing social work actually when I was 18 years old. I started as a case manager in the independent living skills program. It was a work study job. And it really took this detour for me in my career path because that's what I ended up then focusing on in terms of my master's in social work and child welfare and children and families. So I've been in this field of child welfare and mental health since that very young age. And when I started my career after graduating at 23 in child welfare as a social worker, I also started during the middle of recession. So there were literally no jobs and truly hiring freezes happening. So I think that also played a part into I have to be a team player. I have to say yes to things. I have to make sure that I am seen as worthy for this job because I also started as extra help. And I was hoping to make it full time. I ended up getting my position full time, I want to say 4 or 5 months later. But what that did for me in the start of my career is I started saying yes to everything, any and everything. So there was this after our shift at the time if we're fully staffed in emergency response, you would do it once a week. And I was doing it more than once a week because I was picking up all the colleague shifts. And a couple of things happened. Like I felt really good in the beginning of, oh my God, I'm being so helpful and people are like coming to me. And so every month, what would happen is at the end of the month when the schedule came out, everybody's around my cubicle asking me, what shift do you want? Because that was the reputation I had created. And a year in, my body was like, no more. You have lost your mind. And I physically got sick out of just sheer exhaustion. I didn't take any medication. I rested for 2, 3 days. So the physical symptoms died down. I mimicked all the symptoms of flu and fever. But the mental piece of it took a minute because it was my first time as an individual to be like, oh, this happens to people. Like you can get sick from exhaustion. And I'm an immigrant. I moved here at 13 and I moved with my family. And so I've been helping my parents in their business since I was 13 years old. So working and hardworking is almost synonymous to my name. And so it was very interesting to realize that very early on. I'm grateful that that happened in my early career because it was my journey to start saying no, to shed a little bit of the recovering people pleasing tendencies that I have. And over the years, it's made me realize so many other ways that exhaustion has shown up in other places, whether it's saying yes to things that I don't want to do, but also just the chronic stress that I can put on my body as an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur now, 4 years in, and similar thing happened to me like 6 months into my entrepreneur journey. I had this whole naivete of like, I'm gonna I'm going to work 3 days a week. It was my job that made me work this hard. And I mimicked the same schedule, if not more. And right before going on a vacation, I was almost in tears because I was working 13, 14-hour days with no breaks. And it was humbling to be like, well, no one's telling you to do this. This is you. You are a busybody. And so, how do you unlearn? So, I share all this, and I'm sure we'll unpack lots of it. But I share all this to say I come at it from a very personal perspective. I had a lot of shame and guilt and feeling like I was a failure for even burning out. Everybody else is seeming to be doing fine. Why would I be impacted by this? And then there's also just so many layers of like, I'm the oldest, I'm the second mom to my siblings. And so it was very natural to take the caregiving, helping role because that's been my default for a very, very long time. So I say all that to say it's burnout has been a passion project because I know I'm not an anomaly in what I went through and what I felt and what others experience in our profession.
All of that. I just am thinking about a conversation I was having with my best friend recently about the eldest sister trauma. There's like so much trauma connected to that, which leads us to overperforming and over delivering in every part of our life and not being able to let go of that obligation, even when the people that we're caring for, I'm doing that in air quotes, are like, leave me alone. I'm 40 already. Like, I think I got this. But we overfunction in so many different ways, which definitely does lead to that burnout for sure. For
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I've seen
Carl,
that
you wouldn't
happen.
understand. Carl wouldn't understand because he's not an older sister, but
No,
only child.
I'm an only child, yeah, so,
Must be
you know,
nice.
but I'm also a people pleaser,
That's true.
and so I am somebody who finds it very hard to say no. I'm also, a head of household, right? And so, you know, whenever I say no, my first thought is, you know, what if I don't get a chance to say yes again, right? And so those things like that, those weigh on me too. I try to take Fridays off. Good luck with that, right? But, it's it's definitely a challenge, and thinking about that framework you talked about that you created, the um, Beyond Burnout Framework. What does that look like? Let tell us about it.
Yeah, so I'm currently working on a book that will have that particular framework. The book is going to be called Beyond Burnout as well. And in that, I've created sort of this 6 cycle stage that I notice myself going into, and I notice other people going into. I'm hoping that someday it'll be heavily researched and there'll be more data around it. But right now, it's coming from my perspective and what I experience. So in just a quick sort of snapshot, the 6 stage cycle really talks about how burnout really shows up, but I also name the systemic piece. So often, so my first stage, for example, is overfunction because we don't start at I'm exhausted and burnout. We start at saying a lot of yeses, and the yeses could be, in my perspective, for me, for instance, was also, oh, I'm coming in the middle of recession. I really need to be helpful and valuable to be hired. And then there were all those other layers, as I mentioned, on being the eldest and an immigrant child and working from a very young age. All those layers were there. But it was also this very like systemic piece on like, no, I have to make sure I'm helpful, that I'm a team player. And so that over functioning started from the very beginning for me. And I know for a lot of people, when they get in a helping profession, they're not starting at, I want to do my best. They're starting at, let me see how I can be a team player that goes above and beyond. And so my first stage, I really wanted to name it as like, it doesn't start from one day you were fine to next day, now all of a sudden you have burnout. There's all these ingredients that are kind of built in our system and in our society for almost priming you to a place of burnout. So the other piece that I also bring up in my book is around this idea of productivity. and how so much of our conversation and our culture, and I'm not saying you don't have to agree with this, but so much of our conversation in our culture is around how busy someone is, how robust their schedule is. And so much of our conversation will be how, we have so many things going on, and that's almost becomes like a way of qualifying and quantifying, who we are as people.
Like a badge of honor. Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And I think even more so in helping profession as well, of like how busy we are, how many, what impact we're making. And I think that also plays in the role of that burnout, because you start at overfunction, but you're also primed to be really productive. So then even if your body's like, hey, you need to rest, you need to take some time off, there's so much guilt that comes up on, and that I will speak for myself when I try to rest. It's like, well, what did you do to earn that rest? How productive were you before you were able to, enjoy this time off? And so it's been really interesting to kind of unlearn that piece as well, because I think that plays into burnout as well. I'm not negating the fact that workload is absolutely an issue. Lack of support from supervisor or manager is absolutely an issue. And then there are also these other things that we're sort of primed in our lived experience that don't make it easy for us to not be in a place of burnout. So I really bring up the conversation to be, it's not a matter of when, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when burnout's going to happen, especially if we're steeped in trauma and supporting others who've experienced trauma. We're sort of living and breathing that on a day-to-day basis.
Well, yeah, and we carry it home with us too, because even we're off the clock, right? We're off the clock and now we're home. This is our space to live, right? We're making a living at work and now we have like the living to do. And we overburden ourselves there too. Like, oh, the kid's got to be in 75 activities. Oh, I got to, do this. I have to do that. Like that guilt of, I'm going to sit down and shamelessly watch 4 seasons of 90 Day Fiance right now. And then the day's over and you're like, what did I do today? Nothing. And now we're shaming ourselves because we took care of ourselves. It's rough. Definitely a bad cycle to get stuck in.
Yeah. And I have a shout out to my partner. He burned out in his career. And he was like, I will never let myself be this way. So by the time I met him, he had very solid boundaries. Work stays at work. And he's not in a helping profession. He's an IT manager. But what was interesting is when I met him and when we started dating, he's like, oh, let's do nothing. Isn't this great? And I was so uncomfortable because I'm like, I don't really know what that means. He's like, yeah, that's great. We didn't do anything today. And I'm like, no, that's not good. And so I've also been very grateful for having him in my life, because he sort of allows me permission, even though I shouldn't need permission. He allows me permission to like, no, you can sit down and rest, and that's okay. And so there's so much just unlearning that's happened over the years, and I'm still learning and unlearning, to be honest.
Yeah, and that brings up a great point. Learning to be still, right? And learning to be able to give yourself credit to rest at home, but especially at work, right? One of the things I talk about all the time in time management and even wellness classes is being able to take your breaks, right? And that's something that you see our society rewards people who don't take their breaks. They're identified as hard workers. Oh, that person's so dedicated. They never take their breaks. And so just curious about that idea of taking your breaks and maybe some other research you found. What are some things that you see that, that manifest themselves as a result of people who are burning it at both ends and not taking better care of themselves?
Yeah, so productivity, I definitely would say there's a lot of research on that. In the helping profession, I also, whenever I've given my keynote presentation or workshops, I also talk about this concept of moral distress. And that really is, I want to make a decision for this family or this individual, but the policy doesn't allow me to make this decision, or I have so many feelings around this, whether it's insecurity, whether it's feelings of fear or anxiety. And so I'm not making those decisions. So when I feel that level of moral distress where I'm not able to do or support the way I'm wanting to support, that also sort of is breeding ground for burnout. And so when you ask me the question of like, what are some things that come up for people? I would say that piece is definitely there. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with social workers in the trainings and even in my class with my students on this idea of no means I'm being bad and selfish. I should be able to help them. And if I say no, then I'm being bad, I'm being selfish. And then just, I talk about this often on just how much shame and guilt sits in burnout. Just, I know for me, for example, and I've burnt out at least twice in my career and then some. And most of those times, there's been a level of shame and guilt that's been attached to it. I should have known better. I should have seen this before. I am a personal failure. Everybody else is doing fine. So why couldn't I crack it and handle it? So there's all these things that come up for me, and I know for others around shame. So then what also happens is, so the other stage after overfunction, I have drain and sorry, I have friction. And friction is where you don't necessarily you hear the rumblings, but you're not going to do anything about it. So you're feeling your body kind of feel that overwhelm, but it's going to be, I'm fine, I'm still okay, I'm still okay. And so the reason that's my second stage is because often and I often joke about this in my classes and trainings as well, as I don't listen to my body's nudges. I'm not listening to the signal like, hey, slow down, sit down, like sit down. I have to listen to the punches and the slaps, because I'm not listening to the nudges. And so what also happens in that piece of burnout is if you've been over functioning and it's worked out, and I put worked out in quotations, then everything in your body is also challenging you when you're trying to show up differently. So I can't tell you how many times, and I think before our conversation when we started, we were talking about just scheduling and how we were all trying to be more mindful about scheduling. And I can't tell you how many times I've noticed, because I'm trying to be more mindful. I'm like, before I make a decision on any schedule, I need to ask myself these 3 questions. And I have watched myself literally on auto mode filling up that free slot so quickly, and then sitting there like, wait, I was supposed to ask those 3 questions. I was supposed to slow down. Like, what just happened? And it all happened in less than a minute. And it was so automatic to me. And so sometimes what I've also noticed is I have the recognition, I have the insight I want to change, I have maybe even the tools that I want to change. But because this has worked and worked in quotations, so much of my brain is lowering up on like, how dare you change the rules on us? This isn't going to work. And why are we doing it this way? So much of that also shows up, which I think delays the healing that needs to happen with burnout. And then we're more exhausted. We're more physically and emotionally feeling that depletion because now we're feeling like I can't even crack the burnout. So there must be something wrong with me.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about like the good partner, because that breaking point, I think I don't know how it is in your life, but most people, other people notice it before you do. And I know, like, for example, my partner, he will be like, why are you breathing weird? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm not breathing weird. He's like, you're breathing weird. You're making weird noise. I said, what do you mean? I'm just breathing. It's just breath. And he's like, no, you're like, and because I have air hunger, my anxiety starts to show up. I'm feeling the overwhelm. My chest is getting tight, but I don't notice it because I have a deadline. I got to get this thing done. I got to get packed. I got to get moving. And he's like, yeah, you're breathing weird. You need to relax. And I'm like, you don't need to tell me what to do. But he's always right. Can I just say I'm very resentful about that? He's 100% right. Every single time he's like, you're breathing weird. It's because I'm getting close to a meltdown. It's coming.
Mm.
It's coming. And so now I pay attention. I trust him enough to say, when he says you're breathing weird, that's like my sign to say, I got to be more intentional about what I'm doing right now because I'm burning myself out. I can feel it. I don't notice it, but I know it's coming.
I love how you mentioned the idea your brain lawyers up, right?
Yeah,
So, it's true.
I like that too.
Your objection, Your Honor, I should keep working hard because that's what I'm supposed to do, right? Because that's how I was trained to be rewarded is by working harder, not smarter. And so we grind and grind. And how effective are we with grinding, right? And so, just you're also a coach, and you have
Mhm.
your own business. Just Tiff and I are both ICF certified coaches. She achieved her ACC last year and working
Yes, I did.
on her PCC, right? And so,
You would think.
but yeah, so but in your experience, in talking with your clients, what do you tell them about the idea of dealing with that burnout? What advice or what conversations do you have that help them get to that place where they understand the consequences and the challenges with burnout so that they can make better choices?
Yeah, I've definitely had those my fair share of conversations, whether it's as a therapist, whether it's as a coach, whether it's in consulting. And the first step for me really is normalizing what's happening to them, because so much in me and in others, what I've seen is this doesn't feel normal, so there must be something wrong with me, that I have done something wrong for me to feel this way. And so a lot of my work with the client during that moment is first like, well, let's understand the context that your brain has completely edited out. Because what
Hmm.
often happens to us in our situations, like let's say you had a project, like Tiffany, you were mentioning, like I'm grinding because I just have this deadline, I need to make it. And then your body, like, is reacting a particular way. Your brain in that moment is like, you need to get the deadline, and if you don't get the deadline in, it's something wrong with you, right? But it completely edits out the context of how long you've been at this project. Maybe you haven't had any food. Maybe you've been at it for a couple like a week at a time. Maybe you've lost some sleep. There's other priorities in your life as well that are being added to this, and so you've sort of your brain's completely edited out that context and made it 100% your responsibility for this thing being your fault. And so
Right.
what ends up happening for me in those conversations is first, this is normal, and let's bring the context that your brain is editing out, because it's editing out a lot of context and it's making you feel like you're 100% responsible for this. And so that's the first step for me. And then from there, because my clients in those conversations, oh, right, I've been really stressed out because I don't have a supportive boss, or I've been really stressed out because I'm doing two people's job when I really should be doing mine, or I'm really stressed out because I keep saying yes and have a lot of resentment to keep saying yes. It's not, then I'm doing other people's job. Um, and so for me, it's sort of really getting them to understand what's the context, normalizing what they're feeling. And then from there, before we even get to let's make a change, I give some space to, well, how does this behavior help you? And how does it harm you? Because I can't make you get to a place of change if we haven't even done a cost benefit analysis. And often what ends up happening is people recognize it. It's like, okay, we need to go to fix and change and make change. But I take like let's pause here. And most people that I've asked this question are often surprised. What do you mean it's helped me? It's not helping me right now. Yes, but when you started this, it did help you. And so if the coping skill worked once, we're going to keep using it. So I want you to understand what helped you before and why is like what's the barrier now? Because maybe the circumstance changed. So for me, for instance, I know well, I no longer was 23-year-old in an extra help job. I had a full-time position. I didn't need to function the same way that when I started. But my coping skill was still, no, no, we have to be a team player and we have to make sure we're needed. And
Right.
so sometimes that can be really helpful for people to understand. And often, what I've seen in my practice is when the benefit is not enough to what the cost has started being, then most people are open to making that change. But we really have to sit with the how is it helping and how is it supporting? Because it's in those moments where you're also going to notice the lawyering up that's happening and the knee-jerk reactions. Because if I get you to like, let's try the solution as a coach and it's too early or too fast, we're going to take 10 steps back because you weren't really ready. So those are some things that I've supported people with when it comes to conversations on burnout.
So much goodness in all of that. I agree with you so much in the idea that there have been things that have served us well, but don't serve us anymore. Right. And it's almost habitual. We've become habitualized to whatever the coping mechanism is. And it takes some intention to say, look, I needed this. I needed this at one point. It was necessary. But now I can say, thank you for your service and let it go. Rest in peace. Rest in peace, coping mechanism. And like honoring those things, and also intentionally saying, this doesn't serve me anymore. Let me let it go. Let it stay in the past. You think that's a really hard thing to do, especially though when your identity is tied up in
Yes.
I'm the overachiever, I'm the high performer, I do more than. And I was thinking about what you had said earlier about that idea of productivity being part of like our identity. And that's what a lot of companies, especially government, capitalize on is the task. You're as valuable as the amount of work that you produce, even if the amount of work that you produce isn't in line with what our goals are. Right. So if we're in child welfare, like, yeah, I'm knocking out court reports and I'm doing my placements on time and I have these are my stats. But are we reducing trauma to children? Are we keeping kids safe? Are we, preventing abuse and neglect? Those are not always things that we're measuring when we're just looking at productivity. And I think that's where you say that moral
Moral
imbalance is.
distress. Yeah.
Yeah, moral distress, because it's like, I want to help you, but the way that I'm evaluated and the way that I'm measured in terms of success are these metrics. And that's completely disconnected from what I thought I was here to do. And that can really be challenging because you're like, what do I do? What do I do? And unfortunately, many, many people, especially in the burnout, forget the purpose and they stick to the metrics because that's easier to do.
Yeah.
Especially when they're connected to familial, societal norms and work cultures, right? Because if we go against the culture, we go against those norms, we break that cycle. Everyone else who's been in the cycle doesn't understand why you are so selfish or you only think about yourself when it's, look, I can't take care of anybody else, or I can't take care of anybody effectively until I make sure that I'm good. Right. And that's hard, right? That's a hard nut to crack for especially folks who have been that person that people depend on.
Yeah. Yeah. I talk about the idea of never really knowing what self-care was. I think I heard the term self-care first in graduate school. And I remember sitting there thinking, I don't really know what this means. No one's ever told me to take care of myself. Everybody's ever always told me, make sure your sister, your brothers, everybody else is, sorted out. And sometimes, and I'm not even blaming my parents, because I don't think sometimes it was even verbal. It's the nonverbal that you've seen, the assumptions and the stories that we're making from there. So you're right, Carl. It makes it so difficult when you realize I really want to do this for myself, for the longevity of the work that I want to do. And so much guilt and shame, once again, comes in. Because as an entrepreneur, I'm almost forced to take care of myself now, because there is no boss. It's just me. And if I burn out, then that's it. And that was the humble pie I really had to sit with in the first 6 months on that vacation piece example that I was giving earlier on. If you burn out, Avni, there is no business. And so I'm almost forced to take care of myself now in a much different way, because it's just me. And I'm not saying that everybody has to be an entrepreneur to be in that very deliberate journey, I think we can also do it in our work. And so, what I often also talk about in my conversations on burnout is the boundaries that we really need to have. And the first conversation, even before that, is what's your understanding of boundaries and what did you learn or didn't learn? Because I come from a culture and a family background where that's a Western thing. We don't have boundaries. Like that's really the conversation we were having. And so my conversations and my workshops or my trainings is really on like, what's your understanding of boundaries? What comes up for you? Because what I've often seen the theme be is I'm being selfish if I'm putting boundaries. And so then my conversation shifts to let's think of the short term discomfort that comes up for you around boundaries. And what's the long term gain you're going to have? I have really good boundaries with my family, for example, now. And that means I have a much better relationship with them. And I almost had to remind myself in those moments where it was extremely uncomfortable, whether they were saying, do you even care about us? Or whether I was feeling that. I had to remind myself almost like, I am doing this because I want a better relationship. Because if I don't put boundaries, there'll be a point where I'm not going to want to be here in the same way. And same thing for my work. Like I love what I do. And if I don't put boundaries, I'm going to be in a place where I don't even want to be in this profession, which I don't want that. So sometimes it's that reminder of like, how do you sit in the short term discomfort so that you can really see the long term gain you're going to receive from having that consistent boundary?
Yeah. I think boundaries are like the ultimate self-care. It's, self-care, people hear self-care and they're like, oh, it's face masks and massages and pedicures. It's no, 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 no. It's putting boundaries around your time, your effort, your relationships, what you say yes to. Like one of my favorite coaching questions that I love, like around boundaries, is if I say yes to this, what am I saying no to?
Hmm.
So if I say yes to that extra shift, what am I saying no to? Rest. If I say yes to this extra project, what am I saying no to? Maybe time with my family. If I say
Yeah.
yes to my family, what am I saying no to? Sanity, So
Yeah.
it's really about making those informed decisions, but it's hard to do when you're in the fog being the fear, the obligation, the guilt
Yeah.
of like what's most important. Because I do agree with you. A lot of people do feel selfish when they put themselves first. But
Hmm.
I also think it's like the most generous gift that you give to other people when you can say, I want to keep showing up for you. And this is how I'm able to do so.
Right.
Carl, you're muted. Small detail.
Once again, we're here with Avni Panchal, who is a social worker, a professor of social work, a therapist and a coach, and also a soon-to-be author. So we just have a couple more questions. And thank you so much for being here with us today. It really is it's an awesome conversation. So a lot of what we talk about working in government work or civil service work, also in human services, but then also we spend some time talking about leadership in all contexts. And so just when you're work with leaders, what advice would you give a leader to help promote a environment that encourages self-care and wellness and helps to address the potential burnout?
That's a really good question. And for leaders, I think, and I know you have definitely had these conversations in your podcast, but for leaders, in my mind, you can either influence or you could provide a directive. The influence is going to work better because it'll sustain you and your team better. And so the best thing, so I'm a believer in like, how do I influence people as leaders? How do I help leaders influence others as well, rather than here's a directive I need you to do? Because that doesn't always work. It may work from fear, but it's not going to have the longevity that an influence will have. And so with that being said, the best thing a leader can do is model that for their staff and for everybody below them, right? So if I say self-care is important to me, because I see this happen often. We're going to start this new initiative where Avni is coming and doing a workshop on burnout, and we're going to have vicarious trauma conversations. This is so important to us. And that's the messaging, outward messaging that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
But the culture in the agency is still priding on how much time off I haven't taken and how much time I have on the books for how many hours I have not used yet, or how I'm working long hours, right? So you could have an outward messaging of self care is really important. We're going to do this workshop or this process group. But if that's not being modeled, then that non-verbally, the messaging is not aligning. And as humans, if I am noticing a misalignment in verbal and nonverbal, guess what? I'm going to pick the nonverbal because that's what I'm seeing. And
Right.
so what I often saw in agencies, in my own experience as well, and I've had really good leaders and supervisors in my career, which I know that doesn't always happen either, is um, even in them, I saw self care is really important. I want you to take care of yourself, but also, can you finish that court report before you're gone? Um, and so that's how it's really been shown. So, my biggest advice to leaders is, what's your relationship to self care? Do you have similar things coming up for you when you are trying to take care of yourself? Are you feeling that guilt and shame? Are you sort of also recognizing that productivity for you? And so, how do you unlearn that? How do you become vulnerable to share that with people? Like, hey, I'm noticing this. I'm trying to make this change. I want y'all to hold me accountable, but I also want you to know this is what I'm experiencing. Because when a leader provides that level of vulnerability, then their staff can also say, yeah, me too. And there's a level of connection that they're going to have that just goes so much beyond, one workshop that is provided. So I would say the biggest thing a leader can do is modeling that self-care. If you say you're going to be really prioritizing work and life, do you get off on time? And do you make sure you honor the time off, right? So those are the things that I would say for leaders.
I agree with all of that. I think you're very smart, Avni. I love you so much. You're my favorite right now. Um, I would like to just think about it even a little bit, even beyond just that micro level, like supervisors. I want to think like organizationally, how much
Hmm.
we reward over functioning,
Yes.
how much we reward people that are just, it's not sustainable, and it almost becomes an expectation. And so as leaders too, you have to one, like obviously I know we're strapped right now, like almost everywhere I know it's um
Yeah.
understaffed, under resourced, underfunded, add whatever under word makes sense for you, and yet we keep rewarding the people who are burning themselves out until they're gone.
Yes. Yes.
And so that has to shift.
Yes. And I talk about this too, is like your most vulnerable staff isn't the one, and not always, but
Hmm.
it may not be the one that's making a lot of noise. It's the one that's doing the hardest work that one day is going to come to you and say, I'm done. And you're going to be completely blindsided because, like, wait, what? You were fine all along. But what also happens in agencies, which is what happened to me, is when you're sometimes doing good work, the reward is more work. And
Yes.
so I remember in those after our shift example, we were sitting in like a division meeting, and you could see how many referrals people have investigated. And I'm not blaming or shaming anybody, by the way,
No.
because it was all done by me saying yes to everything. And I
Right.
could see like, oh, this person had 90 referrals in this quarter. Someone else had 110. Someone else had 100 and something. Avni's at like 160, 170 because I had said yes to almost every after hour shift, right? So that also creates burnout. And sometimes it's your high functioning, high performers that are not saying anything that actually are going to be the ones that, like, I'm shutting this show down. We're done.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
And it
yeah. Oh, go ahead, Tiff.
Carl. No, go ahead.
I was just thinking about, I had a conversation with a client last month where, we have a series of classes we're doing for his organization, and he mentioned I won't be at the next one because I'm taking 2 weeks. I'm like, oh, great. He goes, yeah. He goes, I'm at the use or lose stage that if I don't use it, then he goes, and I feel bad because this is our busy time of the year. So he's at the point where he's feeling shame for taking time off that he has to take off, and it just always made me think at the moment, gosh, how can how can you minimize that blame or shame by not even reaching that use or lose? I mean, to be able to take it, regularly and effectively, and how much would it help you? How much would it help, your feeling of not just feeling shameful for taking time off, but enjoying the time off that you have with your family. And it's just such a tough nut to crack. Our society values and celebrates people who are burning the candle at both ends. And we know that, like you said, people are burning out, people are quietly quitting, right? Or verbally quitting, or stress does stuff to our body that we don't even recognize happens until it's too late.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right? So just working through that, it's such a tough piece, So, and we don't want to keep you any longer, and we really appreciate you being here, Avni.
Yes.
My last question for you is, if you had one strategy that
Mhm.
you could provide our listeners to start today or tomorrow to help them work towards preventing burnout or minimizing the burnout they may already be experiencing, what could that one strategy that they could implement tomorrow be?
So if I may, I'm going to give two. So
I
one
said one, but
is,
we'll allow
I know,
two.
Overachiever,
I apologize.
overachiever alert.
Okay, well, okay, I'll give one.
We
I'll
want
give
both of them.
one.
No.
We
Two,
want both
Uh,
of
two's
them.
fine.
We want both
Two,
of
we
them.
want both of them. Absolutely. Yeah.
the one that I was thinking about is one sort of paying attention. So it's not a strategy, but more a reflection on pay attention to what you're dropping off. Because one of the things that happened for me and what happens for a lot of people during burnout is you start dropping off the things you actually enjoyed, and then it creates a
Yeah.
vicious cycle of, I don't have time to do that thing I enjoyed, and so I'm not going to do it. But then now I don't feel good. So now we're in this vicious cycle of not really having anything that is sustaining me. So so it wasn't a strategy, but it was more reflect on what have you dropped off that actually was sustaining you, and let's bring that back. To answer your question on one strategy, my biggest advice would be starting small, because what often happens is I am so burnt out, I need to change everything in my life and I need to start yesterday. Like I should have started yesterday. And so my hope is, if you notice in that you're in that space where you're feeling that burnout, I would really focus on what's that one thing you want to start today, and how do you remain consistent on it and commit for like 2 weeks. You're not trying to be perfect. You're not trying to see that this is going to be a miracle thing that changes your thing. You're just simply trying to say, I'm going to do this one thing for the next 2 weeks. So if it's, I've been leaving at 7 o'clock in the evening and I'm getting really frustrated that I don't leave at 5, which is my end time, that's all you're focusing on for the next 2 weeks. Or it could be, I used to love kickboxing and I dropped that off. I'm going to start going back to kickboxing classes for the next 2 weeks. So make it really small, make it really achievable, because when we're burnt out, we're also going to lawyer up on all the things we can't do because we don't have time. So the more complex your solution, the more grand your solution, you're not going to do it. So it needs to be really simple and it needs to be really small.
So,
So you're
like
saying
making sure you
I
take
don't
your
need to
breaks.
schedule. I don't need to schedule a 1 month trip to Europe to rejuvenate. Is that what you're saying?
You absolutely can. And I'm a big believer in things have to be bite sized for like those
Right.
vacations don't come as often. So I also talk
Right.
about this concept of micro moments of self care where it has to be
Right.
these daily small practices. But absolutely take your vacation for a month if you have the funds and the resources.
I have neither, but I'm going to do it anyway. That'll be my
So,
burnout later on. It'll be fine.
so if you never take breaks, take your break, take your lunch, right?
Yes.
Act your wage.
Unplug. Yeah, act your ways, right? Yeah, sure. Put on a do not disturb on your email when you go home, so you're not looking at your work email at home, although it
Yes.
could be difficult for some folks to do, right? But those little things, start with one, right?
Yeah,
And that can make a difference for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
Well, I loved meeting you, Avni, and I hope this is not the last time we get to chat. But I think this is such an important topic, and I think thank you for bringing it to the world, because I think we're all a little bit spread thin because of, everything that's happening
Yes.
around here. And so I really love this idea of coming back to yourself and working on something small.
Yes. Thank you. I really loved having this conversation.
Yeah. And yeah, thanks for joining us, Avni. It's always great to get to hang out with you. So, thank you for sharing your gift with us. And speaking of the gift, uh, we do have a website, or at least Tiffany does. Would Tiffany like
Really,
to?
before I give mine, Avni, do you have, if anybody's looking
Yes.
maybe for your service, I know you're an
Yes.
entrepreneur,
Yes.
and how can people reach you?
Yes, so you can follow and subscribe on any social media platform, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube at the Indian Counselor. That's my social media handle. And I also have three free guides tied to burnout. One's a burnout reset, a productivity script, and affirmations on my website. So it would be my first and last name.com. So avnipanchal.com. If you look me up, you'll find my website and there'll be a free guide there. So those are ways to access me for sure.
Very, very good. And of course, you can find this episode and anything else at www.givingthegiftcoaching.com. That's my favorite line right there. So my shameless plug.
And you can also
Shameless
reach,
plug.
you can also connect with us on Spotify, on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Apple, all streaming platforms. We got a Facebook page, so and we try to keep it as updated as possible with clips and things like that. You definitely will get to see a lot of clips from today's show, so and some pearls of
Yes.
wisdom. So, Avni, thank you so much for joining us
Thank
again.
you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you so
And
much.
my pleasure. And until the next time, I'm Carl,
I'm Tiff, and that's Avni.
and we're
Thank
all
you.
Keeping it real.
keeping it real
Absolutely.
warm, no burning, right? No burning, low simmer.